In 1845, two cutting-edge ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, set sail from England on a bold mission to chart the Northwest Passage. Led by Sir John Franklin, the 129 men aboard vanished into the Arctic wilderness, leaving behind one of history's most chilling maritime mysteries. What followed was a harrowing tale of survival, desperation, and the death in the heart of the frozen North. The fate of the Franklin expedition remains a haunting reminder of the dangers lurking in the pursuit of the unknown. In the summer of 1845, two mighty ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, set sail from England with the weight of a monumental mission on their wooden shoulders. These weren't just any vessels, they were titans of the British Navy, built to endure the ruthless grip of the Arctic. HMS Erebus measured 105 feet, while HMS Terror stretched 102 feet. Both ships had sailed through brutal conditions before, but this journey was different. They had been re-engineered for one purpose: to conquer the elusive Northwest Passage. And at the helm of this daring expedition was Sir John Franklin, a man with a distinguished naval career, but not the first, second, or even third choice for this mission. In fact, he was the fifth. When others turned down the task, Franklin accepted, driven by the same ambitious spirit that had fueled countless explorers before him. The scale of preparation for this voyage was staggering. The British Admiralty spared no expense. Both ships were heavily modified, outfitted like floating fortresses to brave the unforgiving Arctic ice. Their wooden hulls were doubled in thickness to withstand the immense pressure of shifting ice, while the bows and waterlines were reinforced with iron sheeting to cut through even the most stubborn ice floes. They were equipped with revolutionary retractable propellers and rudders, something that had never been seen on ships of this kind. Below decks, steam engines capable of delivering 25 horsepower were installed, an impressive feat for the time, allowing the ships to move forward even when the wind deserted them. The Erebus and Terror were designed for more than just brute strength. They carried innovative technology for survival. Internal heating systems, almost unheard of in naval expeditions, snaked through the ship to provide warmth during the bitter cold months. Water desalination equipment ensured that the crew wouldn't succumb to the dangers of thirst in the frozen wilderness. Even an insulated diving suit was tucked away, a testament to the Admiralty's efforts to prepare for every imaginable scenario. If there was ever a pair of ships ready to take on the Arctic, it was these two. Behind these technological marvels stood the crew. Initially, 134 men had been selected for the voyage, but by the time they sailed, 5 had been sent home, reducing the number of 129 souls. These men were a cross-section of British society, seasoned sailors, young adventurers, and skilled officers who had signed up for a perilous mission that promised both glory and hardship. Their provisions were ample, a sign of both British confidence and their underestimation of the challenges ahead. The ships carried an astonishing 16,000 tin cans of food, a novel preservation method at the time, but one marred by poor manufacturing that would soon reveal a deadly flaw. The cans were not sealed properly, a ticking time bomb of contamination and disease. Still, in the early days, the crew had no idea of the danger lurking within their food supply. They had more immediate comforts: 2 tons of tobacco, 7,500 liters of liquor, and 12,000 books, enough to fill a small library. There were theater costumes on board for men to perform plays and sports gear to keep their bodies active during the long, dark winters. In a nod to their civilized origins, they even brought one of the first daguerreotype cameras, hoping to capture the monumental scenes they were about to witness. The ships also carried a small collection of animals: Neptune, the ship's dog; Jacko, a mischievous monkey; and the ship's cat, whose name has long since faded into obscurity. These animals, though not essential to the mission, were vital for morale, providing comfort and a sense of normalcy in a world where the landscape was anything but normal. With these provisions, technological advancements, and an unwavering belief in their ability to succeed, the Franklin expedition departed for the Arctic with high hopes. They were prepared for anything, or so they believed. The truth, however, would prove far more chilling than any of them could have imagined. The Franklin expedition began with a sense of optimism, departing from Greenhithe, England, on May 19, 1845, with calm seas ahead and one of the most technologically advanced ships ever built. The crew set off with high hopes and the weight of history on their shoulders. Their first stop was Stromness, Scotland, where final preparations were made. After ensuring their supplies were in order, the Erebus and Terror crossed the Atlantic, arriving at the Whalefish Islands of Greenland's coast in July. At the Whalefish Islands, the expedition took on fresh supplies and communicated with the local Inuit, who knew the treacherous Arctic waters better than any Western explorer. But for the British Navy, their sophisticated ships and advanced preparations made them feel invincible. After all, they had navigated this far with little resistance from the elements. They continued into Baffin Bay, where the last known sighting of the Erebus and Terror was recorded by whaling ships in late July 1845. The whalers watched as two great ships pressed further north into Lancaster Sound, disappearing into the icy expanse that swallowed so many expeditions before them. It would be the last time anyone outside the crew would see them alive. As the ice closed in, the crew prepared for their first winter in the Arctic, settling at Beechey Island, a bleak, desolate land some 800 kilometers from their starting point. It was here, during the winter of 1845 to 1846, that the first real signs of trouble began to surface. 3 crew members died, their bodies buried on the island. Though death wasn't unusual on expeditions like this, it was the manner of these deaths that would later raise alarms. The sailors appeared to have suffered from what at the time was a mystery. As a long, harsh winter dragged on, the crew was largely confined to their ships, insulated from the worst of the elements, but not from something far more insidious. The very provisions meant to sustain them were slowly turning poisonous. The lead soldier used to seal their 16,000 tin cans of food had leached into their rations, and the effects of lead poisoning were beginning to manifest. Confusion, fatigue, irritability. Worse still, the water desalination equipment, also lined with lead, only compounded the problem. The crew unknowingly consumed this poison day after day, their bodies slowly deteriorating from within. The men also faced another silent enemy, zinc deficiency, a consequence of their largely preserved diet. Fresh food was scarce, and without enough zinc, their immune systems weakened, making them susceptible to disease. Tuberculosis, which had already claimed the 5 men sent home, was now spreading quietly through the confined quarters of the ships. The very equipment designed to save them was instead slowly condemning them to a fate that none had anticipated. As winter wore on, the isolation and illness began to take their toll. The men still had no idea of the horrors awaiting them in the frozen expanse ahead, but the seeds of their doom were already taking root. Little did they know the true extent of their suffering had only just begun. By the fall of 1846, the Franklin expedition had already endured one punishing winter, but the crew still held faith in their mission. They had pressed on after leaving Beechey Island, navigating the labyrinth of ice-filled channels toward King William Island. This was a critical decision, a fateful choice to take the western route, hoping it would finally lead them through the elusive Northwest Passage. It was a gamble in uncharted waters, and for a time, it seemed like they might succeed. But the Arctic had other plans. As they pushed further, dense ice floes tightened their grip around the Erebus and Terror, slowly bringing the expedition to a standstill. On September 12, 1846, the ships became hopelessly trapped. The ice was no longer something they could sail through or escape. It formed a frozen vice around them, so thick and impenetrable that even their reinforced hulls were powerless. The crew could only watch as their path forward and their escape route vanished under the sheets of white. Winter was approaching again, and this time there would be no retreat. The frozen ships became their prison, immobilized in the sea ice that stretched for miles in every direction. The Terror, under the relentless pressure of the ice, began listing severely to one side, its structure buckling under the Arctic's unforgiving grip. The crew was forced to consolidate onto the Erebus, their last functioning stronghold. But even on this ship, there was no salvation, only temporary refuge. as the temperature plunged and the darkness stretched longer with each passing day. Then, in June of 1847, disaster struck at the highest level. Sir John Franklin, the commander of the expedition, died on June 11th. His death, shrouded in mystery, left the crew leaderless in their most desperate hour. Some believe Franklin may have succumbed to the effects of lead poisoning, which had already started to ravage the crew. Others suspect it was the brutal Arctic conditions, or even a combination of illness and malnutrition. Whatever the cause, his passing sent shockwaves through the already demoralized men. The expedition had lost its figurehead, and within him, the hope of rescue or resolution began to fade. With Franklin gone, food supplies tainted, and the ships locked in place by the unforgiving ice, the crew faced a grim reality. They were stranded, starving, and slowly being poisoned from within. Yet, in their minds, there was still hope. Some believed rescue might come. Others clung to the belief that spring would release the ice and allow them to continue their mission. But in truth, the second winter was not the worst they would endure. The worst was yet to come. By the spring of 1848, after nearly 3 years trapped in the unyielding Arctic ice, the crew of the Franklin expedition made the decision that would seal their fate. On April 25th, the remaining 105 survivors, a fraction of the original 129 men, abandoned the Erebus and Terror. The ships that once promised them protection and success were now frozen tombs. Hope for rescue had all but vanished, and their only chance at survival lay in a desperate and dangerous trek across the ice. The plan was to walk to the Canadian mainland, 240 kilometers away, aiming for Back's Fish River. It was a nearly impossible journey, even for men in peak condition. But these sailors were far from that. Starved, poisoned by lead, and ravaged by illness, they faced a brutal Arctic landscape with little more than grim determination. Casualties mounted rapidly. By this point, 24 officers and crew had already perished, including Sir John Franklin himself. Their bodies, long buried in ice and snow, were only the beginning. As the survivors pushed forward, dragging with them 3,600 kilograms of supplies, including boats mounted on sledges, the harsh reality of their situation became clearer. The terrain was unforgiving. Rough, jagged ice fields and freezing temperatures made each step a brutal test of endurance. The weight of their supplies slowed them to a crawl, but without them, their chances of survival were even slimmer. It was a cruel paradox. Carry too much and die from exhaustion. Carry too little and die from exposure and starvation. The journey was doomed from the start. As they staggered further into the Arctic wilderness, groups began to splinter off, taking different routes in hopes of finding a faster way to salvation. But none found it. Along the coast of King William Island, over 20 bodies would later be discovered, some lying out in the open, others half buried in the snow, evidence of the sheer desperation that had overtaken them. A few men, realizing the futility of the trek, turned back toward the ships, clinging to the faint hope that they might survive the winter on board. But those who returned found no salvation there, only the same frozen fate awaiting them. It was during this tragic march, as food supplies ran low and death stalked their every step, that the most disturbing evidence of their desperation emerged. Later search parties would confirm the unthinkable. Some of the crew had resorted to cannibalism. It was a grim and horrifying act of survival, one that spoke to just how dire their situation had become. As the months wore on, more and more of the men succumbed to the elements. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, there were hints that some of the crew survived longer than anyone thought possible. Inuit accounts from as late as 1851 describe sightings of a small group of gaunt, emaciated men wandering the ice, still clinging to life even as their bodies withered away. Whether these final survivors made it much further is unknown, but it seems that they too eventually disappeared into the endless white wilderness, leaving behind only traces of their final, desperate days. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this.